Welcome to In Conversation at the University of New Haven. My name is Randall Horton. I'm Associate Professor of English. Today we have the privilege of screening the film In Their Shoes, Unheard Stories on Recovery and Reentry, which is an amazing documentary I had the pleasure of being a part of, actually, and seeing the film screened at the Boston Film Festival a couple of weeks ago. And like I say, we are very excited to have two of the people that was sort of in the film, sort of the stars of the film, if you would say. And we have Cheryl Buchanan, who runs Writers Without Margins, and she's the executive director and a facilitator. And so I asked them to come to University of New Haven to sort of screen the film, and like I said, we're very lucky to have them. And so I want to get right to it. Cheryl, can you talk a little bit about the film in terms of its totality and why you decided to do this project?
Thank you. Randall, I wanted to do something that was more visible to a broader audience because I felt like I had this insight working with folks that were in our workshops from the Recovery Center where I was. And I thought that we were looking at, the current addiction crisis, and we were looking at the complications of reentry as, from an academic perspective and from a policy perspective, without necessarily the input of the people who had the most experience in those situations. And I thought that was there was a real disconnect there.
Right.
And what I was seeing, and I didn't necessarily want to mediate that. And I
Right.
felt like hearing from folks directly and seeing their stories in real time would present a possibility that would allow us, a greater
Right,
perspective.
right. And one of the things that's sort of fascinating about the film is that we come through it through writing, through creative writing, and that's sort of the thing, the impetus through which the eyes through which we see these guys as the documentary sort of follow their lives and the ups and downs and the things that one has to go through dealing with incarceration and addiction, which sort of touched me because that's one I've been down that road and I totally know. And so with that said, I want to ask Stephen and Zach a couple of questions in terms of how did you feel about opening up your lives in terms of the documentary, and what do you hope people to sort of gain out of seeing like you guys sort of dealing with these things, and what do you hope people get out of that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So originally, when we first started filming, I don't think I really understood the gravity of what we were doing.
Yeah.
I knew I was telling my story, and I knew I wanted it to reach, a specific audience, and hopefully, based on my experience and my message, they would be able to redirect their lives and not go down the same road that I chose to go down. But as time progresses, and now we're showing the film in front of audiences, and we're speaking about it afterwards in panel discussions, it really is hard to open up the most sensitive, personal aspects of my life. It's
I totally get it.
it's things that I'm not really proud of, but I have learned over the last few events that there is something transformative and healing with telling my story and putting it out there without really holding anything back, And if I hope to have one thing happen as a result, it's really just for people to understand that just because we're dealing with addiction and we have the past that we have, we are real people, and everyone deserves a second chance.
No, totally. Zach, can you add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, getting my story out there was just important to me just because being in the middle or just seeing so many people go down the path they've gone down that were in my life. For instance, like two of my best friends that I've known my entire life died from heroin overdoses,
Right,
and
yeah.
one of them died before I even used heroin. And at that time, I told myself I would never use heroin. And a year later, I was using heroin.
Yeah.
And just, like a lot of people that I came across throughout, my prison time and even, going through programs, realized that a lot of people come from, broken homes or high poverty areas, and I come from, you know, a nice town. My family, my parents still together. Just a normal town. You know, it's not
totally get
the normal.
that.
So it should kind of can show that it can hit anybody. It can hit everybody for.
Right.
know,
No, I
out of
can just
nowhere.
I could use myself as an example, like in what you talked about, Stephen, in terms of getting your story out there, and everyone deserves a second chance. And as you guys know, I've been incarcerated too, and of course, I spent a lot of time, you know, dealing with drugs, and you know, and sort of was sucked into their life and addiction, and it ended in incarceration. And one of the things when I came out, it was very scary. Being around people trying to tell my story, wondering how I was going to be judged, how were they going to see me. And I will say, you know, after the years, it's been a few years now, and it gets easier. And I've come to understand that people need to sort of hear my story, hear you guys' story, you know, because you know, sometimes, you know, life gives us things that we have to deal with, but I think it's how we overcome them. But also, I think there's something to forgiveness and second chances as well. And everyone goes through something in life. I had to come to learn that. You know, just because, you know, you guys went through what you went through, there's other people that you're talking to that you would never know their backstory. And so, you know, that's one of the things when I began to look at this sort of film, I sort of could identify with a lot of things that you guys went through. I could see myself in a lot of those things. So I just want to say, you know, just continue to do what you're going to do, what you're doing in that regard, and it's going to be okay. But I think we're very blessed to have Cheryl come here and sort of screen the film, but also to have you guys here to tell your story, to talk to our students and let them because I tell them every day, I don't hide from them that I've been incarcerated. That's the first thing I tell them when they come to my class. You know, I don't hide it. And I talk about it freely. You know, it took time to get there, I'm not going to lie, but I think they need to understand these things, right? As they go out in the world and try to become world citizens, you know. Cheryl, I want to come back to you. Can you talk a little bit about sort of like the idea of telling their stories and sort of how did that feel? And so was there any trepidation with that? And how did you sort of manage sort of like taking care of the story and trying to sort of stay out of it and let these guys' story unfold as we see the documentary sort of, you know, go from the beginning to end?
Well, I mean, that's complicated too because every time I felt like there was a really hard judgment call to make, one of the things I sort of reckoned with is it wasn't my judgment call to make. So I was really fortunate to have other decision makers with me because I realized if that's the premise of the film is to allow people to tell their own stories, then I really had to rely on Stephen and Zach, and earlier on in the film, you know, Gene and Marcel, who were the other two main characters,
Right.
to make those decisions with me or for me, because I
Right.
didn't want to exploit, and I didn't want to always go for the most sensational or even the most vivid or entertaining possibility. I wanted to really make sure that you know, people's well-being was on the forefront of this. It had to be educating, it had to be informative, but it also had to make sure that, you know, your best interest was in mind. These were questions we never planned on answering, and these are stories, aspects of the story we never planned on telling, not even the stories we wanted to tell a lot of the time, but what was going to be the best decision. So, you know, there are scenes that are hard. They were hard at the time. They're hard to rewatch and re-experience, but I didn't want to be the executive decision maker. So I relied on you guys over and over through the production of this. So.
Right. And just sort of getting back, how did you partner with Wall Street Productions on this? And that sort of
You know, we didn't seek them out, we found them. It was literally almost a year ago, just over a year ago, that Stephen and Zach and I were at a recovery 5K, and we ran into some folks at a booth. And we
Really?
talked about what we're doing, they talked about what they were doing, and they turned out to be folks that were working with Wall Street on a different project. And they showed them the trailer, and they came to us. And they were also sort of mission driven on arts and advocacy. And
okay, well,
found
that's
each other.
great. Well, like I say, we're going to be screening it tonight here at the University of New Haven. In Their Shoes, Untold Stories of Recovery and Reentry. And I want to thank you guys for coming, and I want to wish you all the success as you continue to go around the country screening the film, because I think it's very important and vital Thank you for coming to University of New Haven.
Thank you for
for
having us.
having
Thank
us.
you. All
Thank
right.
you.